sound European, although they maintain the original African names. Now I'll show you in a minute. They have some African in them too. But originally, we all had one common root, one father and one language. Genesis chapter 11 verse 1, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And my point here is that they didn't look much different from one another originally, from where they were coming from. They did not look much different from one another. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelled there. Originally, all these people, and they were not that many. You have Noah, you have Noah's children, and Noah's children had children, and on and on and on. And it was that they were not that many, and they did not look that different from one another. So they had fairly closer hue and all of that at that time, until gradually mutation took place and all these diverse colors came about. So they had common identity. And this is a book, From Babylon to Timbuktu, written by Rudolph Windsor, page 19. He says, the parts of the earth inhabited by the children of Shem. Now, I'll be dealing with Ham and I'm dealing with Shem, but look at what he says about Shem. We're talking about common identity. Were parts of the territory of Assyria and Elam, Persia, east of Tigris River, the eastern part of Syria, and parts of the Arabian Peninsula. All the children of Shem were what? Black. And that's page 19 from the book From Babylon to Timbuktu by Rudolph Windsor. And we go on, and he says, a number of different tribes. See now, they don't call them race. And if you watch it, the Bible doesn't call people races. No, your race, their race. No, no, no. Nations, tongue, people. Because the Bible knows one family. Amen? One race of people. We'll get there. So he says a number of different tribes were entrenched in the southern part of the Tigris-Euphrates region. This southern section was known at different times by many names, among which are Sumer, Akkad, spell Akkad, and Chaldea. But the name best known to us is what? Babylonia. This area was also the location of the Garden of Eden, and the people of this region were what? Jet black. So when we go back, we go back, the people that he says live there in those days, back then, children of Shem and children of Ham. He's going to mention that they were jet black. Sir Godfrey Higgins wrote an eclipsis or an inquiry into the origin of languages, nations, and regions. And he's an Orientalist, somebody who studies differences among people. And he's a British Orientalist. And his conclusion is, in his works, Higgins pointed out that the people of the Bible were what? Black. Now, we just giving you the scholars version, and we'll get into logic and Bible and all of that to establish what we're talking about. Now, what makes a person black or white? It's just the difference in proportion in melanin. Melanin makes the difference. The major difference between black and white is the pigmentation of the skin caused by what? Melanin found in human tissues. The more you have that brownish black pigment thing called melanin, the darker you are, and the less you have, the what? Lighter you are. That's it. It's not the way that people have created this race, different races stuff, has been based on evolution. It's evolution that it's only through evolution that you can say that we have three different races. Biblically, we have no three races, we have one race of people, race of humanity. And it's just different shades from one pole to the other. Dark, light. It goes from here, from dark, darker, brown, whatever, all the way, and then you get light. But it's just one genetic material that is doing doing that. But it's only evolution that can say or can assert that we have three distinct races, because they believe that human beings evolve from various places. Different beings, different people evolve from different locations. Are you with me, somebody? And so they can say that, we have three different, or four, or some of them have more different races, because to have different races, people will have to be distinct from one another, totally distinct, that almost have nothing in common. But when they do the DNA analysis, they realize that white people, black people, brown people, all of that can trace our DNA to one person. So therefore, how can we have three distinct races coming from distinct locations, distinct people, and still have some things running through all of us? Are you with me, somebody? So the idea of three different races, you should bury that from henceforth. But we have stuff that we're going to look at. And then we look at another book we call the Eyewitnesses. I call it Eyewitness News. Classical Greek historian, and we know him, Herodotus, is known as the father of what? History. We all know him. He visited Egypt somewhere around 457 BC to 457 to 450 BC. He wrote in the Histories, that's his book, that the Colchians, Ethiopians, and Egyptians have thick lips, broad nose, woolly hair, and they are burnt of skin. He's describing black folks. Are you with me, somebody? What makes this interesting is that Herodotus was a white man, Greek historian. He visited Egypt and he penned down what he saw. Now you can accuse him of not knowing many things, but I don't believe that a white man went to Egypt and saw black folks that he could not differentiate them from him. So obviously he must be telling the truth. Are you with me, somebody? He was an eyewitness who went there and as a historian penned down what he saw, and he described them as both the Ethiopians and the Egyptians. You watch 10 Commandments and they have made all the Egyptians look what? Why? Help us, somebody. Help us, somebody. And the reason they do that is to take the credit from us, to take the Egyptian civilization, which created monumental stuff that even modern science cannot grapple with. And they cannot attribute that. They cannot see how they can attribute that wisdom to black folks. And it's also because in those days when they were coming up with this changing history, they changed history. See, I'm quoting classical historian. Modern historians have changed history, turned everything upside down. And so, in a time when they were changing history, black folks were slaves. And so they said, we can never fathom how these people that we treat them as animals could have done such a thing in the past. Are you with me, somebody? So they justify that it is impossible for black folks to have done stuff like this in the past. Look at them now. So they switched everything around and made everybody, any important person in history, white. History has been tempered with. Read your history, go back, read two histories. You are reading classical history, and you know that Herodotus now have a book by Chancellor Williams, The Destruction of Black Civilization. Chancellor Williams said that Herodotus said that the Greek philosophers, we pride them high, they boasted by getting their education from the Ethiopians. Yes. They've done some damage to history. They're not telling, no, they're just quoting modern historians and stuff. The modern historians who have been affected by racism, they don't tell the truth. Affected. But go back to classical history and you will see how the Greeks honor the black folks for the civilization for which they benefited. And I want to tell you this, another book, A Stolen Legacy by G.M. James. He said that the Egyptian civilization was the flower of, Greek civilization was the flower of Egyptian civilization. In other words, the Greeks borrowed it from the Egyptians. Don't you remember when Alexander went to Egypt, conquered Egypt, put his name on the library in Egypt, Alexandria, made that whole town? The documents that they had, the Egyptians had saved all this rich store of knowledge, and the Egyptians used to keep their knowledge in the temples because it's sacred. But when they conquered Egypt, they raided all these temples and took all this wealth of knowledge and brought them to Greece, and they translated them from Egyptian language to Greek language and put their names on it as the authors. Some damage has been done in history. But the point over here is that the classical historians, they themselves are saying that the Egyptians, let's see them again, thick lips, broad nose, woolly hair, and they are what? Burnt of skin. Now see, they thought that we are like this because the sun burned us. You didn't hear me? That's what they thought. But the description we have here is not white folks. Is that clear? But Hollywood. Remember when I gave you the tradition, Hollywood, all this other stuff, they switch things around. They switch things around. Dr. Clark, forward for the book Civilization or Barbarism by Sheikh Anta Diop, says the Greek writers Herodotus repeatedly referred to the Egyptians as being dark-skinned people with what? Woolly hair. He said they have the same tint of skin as the what? Ethiopians. So bear two things in mind. Ethiopians and the Egyptians had the same complexion. Are you with me, somebody? We're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere. The opinion of the ancient writers on the Egyptians is more or less summed up by Gaston Maspero, 1846 to 1916, in The Dawn of Civilization, where he says, by the almost unanimous testimony, ancient writers, classical writers, unanimous testimony of the classical writers. What's the conclusion? Of the ancient historians, the Egyptians, belong to an what? African race, which first what? Settled in Ethiopia on the mid-Nile. Following the course of the river, they gradually reach to the what? To the sea. In other words, when you come from Ethiopia, you go to the Mediterranean Sea. That's what he's saying. Following the Nile, Ethiopia to Egypt. In those days, they were one. And that is